For some background on the house, it was built around 1650 near Oxford, England. My parents are well off, so it's pretty nice, big but not excessive in a small village, and it's right next to a graveyard. As in, we have an outbuilding, which is an old blacksmith's forge, that literally sits on top of the graveyard, and our garden lowers compared to the graveyard wall because the place is so full of bodies. It was originally one house, then split to 3 with a small cottage, then to 2 houses, and I live in the slightly bigger of them. The house has been a pub, too. We still have a door from when it was. The land dates way back. We have 2 Roman wells on the property, one covered by the patio, and one that's full of earth in the garden, which had Roman artifacts surrounding it that had been put there by some old residents. It is really ancient, so it makes sense that it's haunted, right? My family moved in February of 2015. My dad, my mom, my older sister, and me. We had no idea of any of the shit in this house at this point. At first, there were just some weird vibes. We heard some strange noises, some doors closing on their own, but nothing to freak out about. Apart from in the section of the house where no one slept in. Our then spare room in a small upstairs wing of the house. Our printer was kept down there, and whenever my mom sent me to get printouts, I would always sprint away as fast as I could out of fear. I used to cry and protest about going down there because it felt so terrible. There was just a thick air of terror. We actually got the village priest in to bless it about a year later. I went to a Christian school, and my mom thought that it would put me at ease. Instantly, all bad stopped down that side of the house, and my sister suddenly moved rooms down to it, and her old room became our spare room, and instantly got that same thick, heavy air. A few months in, maybe April, my mom had a weird experience of the corner of the duvet being tugged on, and then a creature crawling up her back. It wasn't sleep paralysis, as she had had that before, and she could move. It was heavy, crawling up her back like a person, and it got to her head and disappeared. A lady came round. She heard the house got new owners. She had lived there in the 1970s, and told my mom that she had had the exact same experience of the tugging and the crawling, and also that her piano played itself, among a few other weird experiences, before my mom mentioned anything about what she had experienced, and my mom's heart sank. She didn't tell me anything, until a few weeks later when I came to her in tears, saying that I had seen a shape walk into the room and then disappear, and have something tug at the duvet and walk up the front of my body, and that it was definitely not sleep paralysis. That's 3 people having the same experience, give or take how the person is laying, without communicating it. Odd. I can't explain the feeling. By this point, we were all aware of some weird stuff. We found chicken bones in the roof of our cellar, which is way older than the rest of the house, possibly like 1500s. We had doors slamming. We had footsteps. But then, my dad had an experience. He has never believed in ghosts. He's lived in old houses for a long time. He's had family friends have terrible experiences with the paranormal. He grew up Catholic, and he didn't believe anything up until about January of 2016. My mother, sister, and me were all in the kitchen, and he was walking past the spare room and heard shuffling coming from inside. He shouted my mom's name, asking if it were her, and a deep, gravelly voice replied, "Try again." He ran down the stairs, white as a sheet. At this point, it was 2017, everyone had been through something in the house. Shapes would walk by, disembodied footsteps roamed around at night. We had objects moving, watchful eyes on your back, chairs moving, inexplicably cold rooms. Pretty typical things for a haunted house that were happening basically on the reg. Also at this point, I made some new friends and started inviting them around. The spare room had a double bed, so that's where we would have slumber parties. I had several friends ask me, "Hey, did you hear that knocking sound on the walls or the drawers last night?" Every time they came over, all of them left with very similar accounts. I would then relay my stories and watch them turn pale. It was fun for me, probably not for them. I had some friends over again, and we made a point of shutting the door to see if it would open, and it did. We all had trouble sleeping that night. In 2018, I had a German student exchange at school, and my exchange partner slept in the spare room. On the last night of her stay, I had something knock on the slats underneath my bed. It woke me up, but I fell asleep again, and it woke me up again a few minutes later, and knocked while I was awake. I left the room and told whatever it was to get out, and it did. I slept fine for the rest of the night. It did not like that the German girl was in the spare room. Around this time, our next-door neighbors walked up to us one day and asked if we had had our house exorcised because of how terrible things were for them. Heavy footsteps would stomp around their house. They heard the disembodied crying of children and playing their glockenspiel in the middle of the night. They were terrified and presumed that the increased disturbance was because we had had it blessed. We didn't, but at this point the activity did slow. Every now and then from late 2018 to 2020, we had banging and footsteps and touching and noises again, the usual. Nothing that phenomenal, just small, creepy, unexplainable happenings. Lockdown was uneventful until November of 2020, when we had our kitchen remodeled. The kitchen was kinda remaining from about 30 years ago, so I reckon that it really made the ghosts mad to have it changed. They were mostly fine with us in the house now. They knew us. We had lived there 5 years after all. But our builder they hated. He worked during the day when me and my sister were at school, my dad at work, and my mom, who works from home, would run errands. One day he asked my mom if someone else lived with us. She said no, and asked why, and he said that he had heard footsteps in my room above the kitchen, and doors slamming, and voices and noises during the day that started from the moment that we were all out of the house. He also heard footsteps walk into the kitchen and stand behind him, thinking that it was my mother and striking up the conversation, but realizing that she was out of the house when she didn't reply, and that there was nothing there. Several times he thought someone was there with him, and heard them move and breathe when they weren't. He's a 6'2" burly, muscular firefighter, and he also felt a larger person. Bearing in mind, everyone in my house is 5'6" to 5'8", and we always hit our heads walking around. Leaning over him and looking over his shoulder, feeling them in his space. You know when someone stands next to you, and there being nothing there. Seeing this giant petrified was quite funny in all honesty, but also very strange. This brings us to present day. Yesterday, I was going to go with my mom to go shopping. I thought her car had started, so I ran into the spare room to look out the window in the driveway to see her car, and she hadn't. I shrugged it off and kept looking out for a couple seconds, when I heard shuffling and breathing behind me. I spun around, and on the other side of the double bed was a kid. A young boy, maybe about 6. He was staring at me. He was pale, dark-haired, and dirty. He looked sick, malnourished. He didn't feel scary or mean. He just felt sad, and the room was freezing. I would have thought that he was a real kid if he didn't look so out of place. We looked at each other for what felt like a lifetime, but was really only about 3 seconds. And I sprinted out of the room and yelled for my mom. I relayed the story to my parents, and they were horrified. My dad went to look and saw nothing. My mom went upstairs and said there was the same thick, heavy air throughout the whole upstairs area. It's almost like a portal opens up and the house feels so unnaturally wrong and hostile. It's unlike anything I've ever felt before in my life. Seeing it was easily the most scared that I've ever been. It reminds me of when my neighbors said that they had heard children. I'm an atheist, but I slept with a crucifix next to me last night, not taking any chances. There are some really, really messed up reasons to live in a haunted house. I, being of sound mind and body, don't know any of them, but I am superstitious as hell. So when the wife and I moved up to New Hampshire, right on the Vermont border, we were looking for a place to rent for a year or two before we bought a house. Now, for all of the New Englanders here, my wife is a native. I'm not. She's used to New England and the vast emptiness that this small area has to offer. There are places even she won't let me travel to after a certain hour because, quote-unquote, that route you have to take, people don't come back from it. Of course, I'm not a native, so I have no clue about any of this. So when I would come home late after dark from work and tell her I took X route, she would kind of look at me in shock and awe at my stupidity. We found a home right on the above-mentioned border on the Vermont side. We loved it. It was a fantastic place to live, except for the basement. I could not shake the feeling of being watched and stalked like prey. So, like any reasonable adult, I said screw it and didn't go down there except for during the day. Then one night, after gaming for hours in my loft, I got hungry. I went downstairs, kissed the missus, and walked past my basement door toward my kitchen. I don't know if anyone reading this has gone hunting, but there's a moment when you sometimes experience, especially hunting predators like coyote, wolf, bear, etc. Sometimes they know that you have them in your sight. Sometimes they look toward you, not quite at you, but it feels like they are boring into your soul saying, "You've got me, make it quick." It's an eerie sensation, and sometimes you take the shot, sometimes you don't. On that night, as I was walking past that door downstairs, I saw red eyes and a humanoid figure. I froze, just stopped dead in my tracks. I gave that same look of, "You got me, make it quick." After that momentary lapse of sanity, I just scooted real quickly away from the door, grabbed a weapon, and called my wife, saying that there was someone downstairs and to call the police. There is no other entrance to the basement, and I had the door covered with my weapon from a safe position where I could easily run from the house. The cops showed up, I disarmed, they cleared it out, and they found no person, but a muddy set of footprints that started facing the stairs up, and then proceeded to walk into a hall in the back corner of the basement by the water heater. For some context, the wall in question also blocked off the area directly under my bedroom. It was a solid wall, with a small crawl space and maybe about 4 inches of clearance on the other side of it. The cops called the detectives checked it, couldn't see anyone in it, and they couldn't enter it. Photographs were taken, shoe sizes compared, my feet were too big, my wife's feet too small. We got a good contact number for the detective, and the wife and I stayed at a hotel for a couple nights. For months afterward, I would have the same thing happen. Eventually minus the cops. It actually got relatively normal. Good old Red Eyes in the basement, chilling like a villain. Wife was less enthused by my antics. Cheerfully, just about, and when I would spot Red Eyes, I would always give him a good old, "How you doin'?" Of which we would still have muddy footprints, and I would just have to clean them up. So, COVID hits, the lockdowns happen, and we have an opportunity to move to a better house, one where we'd be able to work at home better. The main reason that the home was better, though, was that we had a mold issue in this house. It was in between the panes of glass in the windows, and every day we were cleaning it from the windowsills, door frames. Hell, we had to replace pieces of furniture multiple times, and we are very clean people. We notified the landlord over multiple months, and eventually a year, and after their actions were not helping at all, we decided to move. The landlord decided to get a housing inspector out there immediately after we left. The inspector came and verified that there was indeed a mold issue. I don't know if they met red eyes. However, they did find a metric ton of readings of high spore counts on the wall bordering the space below my old bedroom. The wall where the footprints always ended. So, since it was filled, the inspector scoops a little bit of the earth on the other side of the wall through that crawl space. It wasn't earth as in dirt. It was approximately 7 feet of mold. The landlord then immediately contacted specialists to remove all of it, and notified me to offer some kind of damages for it in the form of refunded partial rent payments. All in all, it made my 2020 pretty good. Until about 3 months later. The landlord calls me and offers to send me a full refund of all rent from the time when I was living there, minus what she already gave. Why? There was a corpse. The medical examiner said that it was the man who had owned the property before my landlord. He was a lineman who, after talking to surviving family members, wore a size 8 shoe. Smaller than my size 11 shoes, bigger than my wife's shoes by a mile. It was red eyes. It had to be. I don't know how you got there, but hell, bud. I hope you found peace. Sorry for not checking it out sooner. I did, after reading about his obituary and contacting his family, swing by his final resting place to drop off flowers, place a stone, and share a good morning like I used to. Till better times, red eyes. I thought I would share some of my experiences from living in a haunted house. I lived there for 14 years, just moving out of it last September. I'll start with the disclaimer that I was not a believer. I always thought ghosts were fascinating, but I never looked for them blindly. Most of my early experiences I tried to find real explanations for. Honestly, this house had countless things happen, but I'll just relay some of the bigger ones. It was a townhouse, and the floor plan was living area upstairs, bedroom downstairs. You entered the house on the top floor. My first night sleeping there, my bedroom was under the living room. I heard footsteps walking across the living room all night long, to the extent that I grabbed my framing hammer a few times and snuck up there, convinced that someone had broken in. This happened repeatedly for years, and I convinced myself that it was noise traveling through shared floor beams with neighboring units. Although it still happened often, even when the unit that I shared a wall with was vacant for 18 months. There were also a lot of odd times when doors would crack open slightly and close. Several times this happened when my mom's dog was over. He would walk towards a door, it would open for him. We would walk through it, and it would literally close behind him. When he would come to leave the room, the door would let him out again. Very weird. At some point, my now wife moved in, and it escalated. One night, I woke up in bed and saw an opaque figure sitting up in our bed, initially thinking that it was my wife sitting upright and looking out the window. When I asked what she was doing and she didn't reply, and went to shake her shoulder, my hand just went through nothing. I then realized that she was asleep on the pillow, and whatever was standing there had just vanished. I jumped out of the bed and looked everywhere for an answer. Nothing could be found. I told her about it months later and she said, "Oh God, I have seen so many strange things here and I didn't want to tell you because you would have thought I was crazy." There was a lot of little things. She would yell for me from upstairs because she swore that she just saw me walk past the kitchen doorway, etc. Often things would move from where we put them. Once near Christmas, we left the house and came back to the lights being turned on, that we know weren't turned on, and ornaments on our tree having been rearranged. We got a break at some point for a while, and when we were in bed one night, bedroom door closed, we made a joke about how our ghost hadn't been active for a bit. And as soon as we said it, the bedroom door started shaking hard in place. Final share, and the one that people seem to think is the creepiest. When our daughter was born, we would shush her to nap with the 3 shush method, rocking her in our arms, saying shh, 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 over and over. Well, I had put her down, and I ran to the hardware store. My wife called and said, "I thought you were at the hardware store," and I said, "Yeah, I am now." She paused and yelled, "Get home now." I ran back. It was a 3-minute drive, and my wife was holding our daughter. She said that after I left, our daughter started fussing, and over the baby monitor she heard the shh, shh, shh. And she got confused, because she hadn't seen me go back downstairs, not realizing I was already down the hill when the noises started. One last one, daughter related. When she got a few years older, maybe 3 or 4, she would cry at night, and one night I went in and asked her what was wrong. She said that she was scared of the shadows. I showed her that the shadows were just light tricks, and I did a shadow puppet, and she said, "I'm not scared of those shadows. I'm scared of the scary shadows that come sometimes." That honestly freaked me out a little. Again, there were tons of other incidents, but these are sort of a greatest hits. People have asked me why I stayed in the house for so long, and as funny as it sounds to some, it was never scary. There was no feeling of malevolence or harm. In fact, I always thought the shushing of my baby story was more of a "wow, this ghost is nurturing" kind of thing. Or maybe even my dad coming back to visit. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed my spooky stories. We have a house in the desert of Nevada that we think is haunted. I would often hear people calling my name clear as day from somewhere in the home. But later I would find out that there was no one there. These voices take the shape of one of my family members, like my sister, mother, father, or sometimes a child that I don't recognize. I never really paid attention to it because it was happening like twice a week. I got used to it, but like last week, I was vacuuming the house and I got to the end of the hall where my room is. I see my dog in my room and I just smile at her and she goes back to sleep. But when I turn around, I saw my dog again, behind me. My dog never went past me, so there's no way that she could have gotten there without me noticing. I looked back in the room and see a child's head peeking out of my closet. I was so terrified that I ran out of the house and took a hotel for the night. I still don't know if it's a demon or a ghost or something else. The demon child, or whatever it is, didn't actually look like a child. It was almost like I just knew it was a child when I saw it. It's hard to explain. It has no nose, and it was bald with the eyes of a reptile. I can't quite explain any more details because I ran out of there so quickly. I'm in the process of moving out right now, and some even more strange and horrific things have occurred. I would have the most horrible dreams at this house, and this house only, for example. I have dreams of an abandoned warehouse, with a dead, decapitated baby head with a spine still attached, floating around and screaming while chasing me. I would also get severe sleep paralysis. There was a black, demon-like entity that looked like a snake that would climb walls and ceilings. Sleep paralysis has never happened to me before I moved here. I don't know if dreams can be linked to ghosts or demons. I would also see a shadow man lurking around my house from time to time. I thought it was my imagination. I wish it was. I would also hear something running down my hallway, and I would see a dog-like creature outside of my house. But it didn't really look like a dog. It was like 5 or 6 feet tall with long, jagged teeth and just roaming around outside. I thought I was going crazy, or that my eyes must have been playing tricks on me, but I really don't know. Whatever the thing is, I think it can take the shape of anything. It's probably not a ghost. It's probably a demon or an alien or a cryptid that can shapeshift. Like I said, I really don't know. I need your help to figure out what it could be. I will be moving out soon, and I'm not staying in the house anymore. I absolutely hate that place. This took place in 2012 when I went to Rome for a vacation with my family for about 3 weeks. It was a week before I had to go back home, so my dad wanted us to visit the town that he was from, so his cousin drove us to the house that he owned. To give everyone some backstory, it belonged to a duke back in the day. But anyway, we got there and nothing seemed odd at all, except that when his cousin showed us where I and my grandmother would be sleeping, because there were not enough rooms and beds. I and my mom had to share a room with 2 single beds, and my dad slept with his cousin. As soon as I walked into this room, something felt off, because it was icy cold, freezing cold, and it felt like I was being watched. Even my mother felt the same thing, that something was weird about that room, because the other rooms in the house did not have that same energy. I even told my father that something didn't feel right, that I didn't want to stay there, that I wanted to leave, that I got a bad feeling being in that room. It was like my gut was telling me that something was there that was not supposed to be. However, it was enough to freak me out and just give me a bad feeling. The day progressed, and it was nighttime, and walking back in that room, I got really bad vibes, and I told my mother that I didn't want to stay there, that something just wasn't right, that I could feel it. She said, "Well, look, it's only for a night." As we got ready to head to sleep, she went toward the bed, and all of a sudden the bed fell, and it was almost as if someone had pushed it. It really scared me. It somehow landed near the fireplace in the room. As my mom called out to my dad and his cousin, they fixed the bed. I was freaked out, to say the least. Anyways, at that moment, me and my mother just prayed to help us get through the night and protect us from whatever was in there. I did not sleep well, and as soon as the morning came, I was ready to nope out. I took a picture of the bed with my camera, and after looking at it, you could see a black shadow near the fireplace hovering over the bed, and it was super creepy.